The terrifying Blanka! If you happen to be like myself and grew up in the 90s getting to experience Street Fighter 2 when it was brand new, you will likely be able to recall that there was nothing like seeing Blanka for the first time. Sure, we would quickly learn that Ryu was probably the easiest to play as, and Dal Sim had some great reach, but Blanka would be the character who first grabbed our attention most due to his intimidating aura. Having a combatant who literally looked like a monster in a game full of mostly realistic looking combatants instantly made this creature unforgettable, and paired this with the fact that he could electrocute people as well as latch onto them and suck their blood, everything about Blanka was as cool as he was horrifying. Holding this level of menace in mind, one would expect Blanka to remain an unnerving presence in the franchise, continuing to threaten opponents right throughout Street Fighter's close to 40 years of success. However, if you have happened to have played Street Fighter 6, or the other newer entries in the series for that matter, you will know that unfortunately that this is far from the case, and sadly this once daunting adversary has been reduced to little more than a comic relief joke of a character. So with all of this said, join me today as we celebrate the existence of this once great character and examine his sad descent into disappointing mediocrity. What even is this fighter supposed to be today? Let's discuss. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the terrifying rise and fall of Blanka. Yeah. Every single fighter in Street Fighter 2 is memorable in appearance and stands out in their own ways, but out of all of these colourful cast members, perhaps none are quite as strange and unique as Blanka. This Brazilian Incredible Hulk looking fellow, who has the ability to emit electricity to use against his foes, has captivated gamers with his absurdity for many years, which raises the question, why does this fighter look so different from the others? Well, as most people know, Blanka first appeared in 1991 within the legendary title known as Street Fighter 2. However, what may not be immediately apparent is that the staff at Capcom had already been developing the characters for a few years prior to this. As discussed before on this channel, there was a time when Final Fight was test marketed as Street Fighter 89. Akira Yasuda, who would go on to work on Street Fighter 2, worked as a planner on this beat 'em up. It was during the development of this game that Yasuda came out with his first early design for Blanka, who at that point was a wild African man raised by lions, who would fight wearing chains named Anabebe. More on this controversial sketch later, but moving on to the development of Street Fighter 2 itself, Yasuda continued to work on this conceptual character until he eventually moved into a large man with thick hair and sideburns named Hammer Blanka. The on-record reason to adapt this design further, giving him a strange green appearance and feline-like characteristics, was reportedly because Yasuda felt that the Street Fighter 2 roster needed more diversity. After all, don't you think the game has too many characters who look like humans? Yasuda certainly thought so, so introducing this menacing abomination was his answer. Speaking of this pioneering game, you can experience it alongside 15 other Street Fighter arcade games in the amazing Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection. That's not all though, as if you are like myself and love sprite-based fighters, I highly recommend the Capcom Fighting Collection, a single purchase containing the Darkstalkers games, Cyberbots and more, and even Red Earth, a hidden gem for Capcom arcade fighter that was previously lost to the arcades of the 90s. I can get you up to 75% off of both of these huge collections simply by using my affiliate link via the pinned comments. Or, if more modern fighters are for you, don't worry, thousands of deals can be accessed, such as 75% off of Street Fighter 6 and even a massive discount on a Year 2 Ultimate Pass, giving you M. Bison and soon those sweet SNK characters such as Terry Bogard and Mai Shiranui. Ooh, happy shopping! Blanka, who emerged in Street Fighter 2, featured very prominent physical characteristics, such as his vivid green colour. The initial reason behind why he looked like this was that he grew up in a jungle environment in Brazil, having a completely plant-based diet. The chlorophyll in his food would affect his skin colour, eventually becoming green permanently, somewhat like those stories of people turning yellow from drinking too much Sunny Delight as children. But over the years, this was not the only reason given by Capcom with regards to why he looked so inhuman, and some excuses put forward were even more preposterous. The original, incredibly ridiculous reason for Blanka's strange appearance was adapted, and instead his odd appearance was attributed to him being on a plane as a small boy that got struck by lightning during an electrical storm, causing the aircraft to crash. The young boy woke up in a jungle and emerged with strange new powers, including the ability to emit electricity. Basically, they gave him an origin story similar to many Marvel superheroes, gaining special abilities due to an accident and learning to fight due to growing up in the jungle. Still, there is a further twist to Blanka's murky beginnings, as, in Japan, this tale was told slightly differently. Rather than the plane coming down in freak weather, the crash was caused by Shadaloo, aiming to kill a Brazilian minister on board. While green skin has always remained a trademark of the character, additional palette swaps have allowed gamers to play as Blanka in a range of other colours too. In terms of his fighting capabilities, Blanka is said to fight in a self-taught animalistic style. However, when Street Fighter 2 first showed up in the West, Capcom's USA division decided to refer to this style as Capoeira, the Afro-Brazilian martial art that combines elements of dance, acrobatics and music. Unfortunately though, if you know anything about this combat form, it quickly becomes clear that the Americans were simply talking out of their arses. But we will get Eleanor using this fighting style in Street Fighter 3. His most well-known signature attack is probably his ability to emit electricity when crouching, shocking anyone foolish enough to come into contact with him. Away from his trademark maneuver, Blanka fights mainly relying on his speed and unpredictability. Unfortunate foes often find themselves caught off guard by his appearance, allowing Blanka to surprise opponents further with his dynamic arsenal of moves and sudden ferocious attacks. These maneuvers include many of his infamous rolling attacks, making him a tough adversary to crack when paired with his exceptional evasiveness, aided by his ability to jump very fast. All in all, this makes Blanka a master of jumping over oncoming projectiles and countering attacks in unusual ways. In his famous debut, in Street Fighter 2, Blanka enters the Second World Warrior Tournament, after acquiring a taste for fighting following the plane crash and living in the wild for so long. Eventually, Blanka finds a local village where he makes connections, leading to his participation in the tournament. As stated earlier, if you were a kid in the 90s like myself, you'll remember just how intimidating this frightening foe was in this epic game. However, if you are skilled enough to beat Street Fighter 2 with this classic character, then you will be aware that his ending reveals that he is more human than many of us had previously imagined. In an arguably aura-killing moment for the fighter, after defeating M. Bison, Blanka's mother bursts onto the scene. In a fortunate twist of fate for the feral fighter, apparently his birth mother recognised him on television broadcasts of his matches by the anklets he wears. In Blanka's ending in Street Fighter 2, she addresses him by his birth name, Jimmy, revealing that she gave him the anklets before he was in the plane crash as a little boy, bringing his Street Fighter 2 tale to a close. He really was Jimmy, the original Mr. Beast. While mildly amusing at the time and certainly a happy ending for this monstrous looking man, this goofiness would proceed to follow Blanka until this very day. So let's look at the rest of this fighter's long career. As we know, the success of Street Fighter 2 would lead to a live-action Hollywood motion picture, where Blanka would obviously appear next. To understand his appearance here fully, we must go back to Street Fighter 2 the video game once more. If you can recall, in Gao's ending, he accuses M. Bison of killing his friend Charlie in Cambodia. The same Charlie, aka Nash, who would go on to be a playable fighter in various Street Fighter games in the future. With us all not having a clue who Charlie Nash was yet at the time, this allowed the movie producers to take creative liberties. What I mean by this is that the writers of the movie chose to make both Charlie and Blanka one single character. So how did this play out on the big screen? Basically, near the beginning of the movie, Guile's close friend, Carlos Blanka, nicknamed Charlie, is captured by Bison and subjected to genetic testing in his quest to create the perfect soldier. This experimentation gives Blanka his strange appearance and unique abilities within the movie's own canon. Even more amusingly, this same version of Blanka would also appear as a playable fighter in the Street Fighter movie games too, meaning there are actual video games out there where Blanka and Charlie Nash are considered the same character. Around this time, Blanka also appeared in the Japanese Street Fighter animated movie, but only making a brief appearance. In this animation, he is held captive in a luxury hotel, but is lowered from a cage to fight Zangief for the guests' evening entertainment. Past this point, while the world of Street Fighter games would continue with the birth of the alpha games Street Fighter 3 and Capcom crossover fighters, in the mid-90s Blanka was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps the goofy choices being made with the character was enough to kill his relevance, or at least for a while. Blanka would not turn up as frequently as many of the other fighters from Street Fighter 2, with his next appearance not occurring until early 1998 in the polygonal fighting game published by Eureka known as Street Fighter EX2. According to the story of EX2, Blanka was in disbelief that he missed out on the first EX tournament, and was shocked that the World Warriors chose to compete without him. He entered the tournament caring little for winning or losing, simply wanting to go wild and have a good time. During the tournament, Blanka becomes captivated by Dhalsim's ability to contort his body in strange ways. During these events, Dhalsim took pity on Blanka, seeing the mind of a harmonious creature trapped inside a body that others found frightening, pushing Blanka further into a sort of Hunchback of Notre Dame sort of direction rather than the blood-sucking menace he could have alternatively remained. When EX3 was released in later years, Blanka would return, and since the game is a tag team affair, he would choose Dhalsim as his partner, an offer that Dhalsim graciously accepted. But of course both of these titles are Eureka offerings, so let's look at what Capcom had in store for him next. In terms of Capcom developed Street Fighter games, Blanka would finally return to their fold in mid-1998 with the release of Street Fighter Alpha 3. As discussed here many times before, the Alpha game served as a sort of story precursor to Street Fighter 2, occurring shortly after the events of the 1987 original Street Fighter game. In Alpha 3, the title gives us a glimpse of Blanka's life before entering the second World Warrior tournament, illustrating to us what was going on in this character's life at an earlier stage. In this game, Blanka eats a melon on a poacher's truck and unwittingly travels to civilization for the first time. Throughout the events of this story, he faces off against Dan Hibiki and later Zangief, unknowingly sabotaging Zangief's chances of destroying the criminal organisation known as Shadaloo. Eventually, he faces off against and defeats Balrog, before finally fighting them Bison. In Blanka's Alpha 3 story, he works together with Dan and Sakura to destroy Bison's Psycho Drive. However, it's worth noting that the characters' endings throughout the game are contradictory to one another, so who really knows what is and isn't supposed to be canon at this point? One thing is for sure, Capcom continued to position Blanka as more affable than frightening, and aligning him with the plucky upstart Sakura and the comic relief Dan Hibiki certainly didn't do him any favours in rebuilding his once terrifying aura. Past this point, it would seem the Blanka character would take yet another hiatus before appearing in more fighting games, with him in the early 2000s showing up in Capcom vs SNK and Capcom vs SNK 2, with both games utilising Blanka's Alpha 3 sprite work. These games marked Blanka's first appearances in Capcom crossover games as a playable fighter. While Blanka would miss out on being included in Street Fighter 3 completely, he would eventually make his return to the main canon, returning in Street Fighter 4, the game that acts as the chronological sequel to Street Fighter 2, but a prequel to Street Fighter 3. If you can recall, Street Fighter 2's story ended with Blanka being found by his mother, but it appears that unfortunately they did not live happily ever after, as people continued to stare at Blanka wherever he went. Frustrated, he headed to Hong Kong to visit his old friend from Alpha 3, Dan. Upon meeting up with him, Dan, who wasn't in Street Fighter 2, was eager to learn about Blanka's experiences in the second World Warrior tournament. This leads to Blanka, Dan and another old friend, Sakura, entering the Sin tournament. Blanka's given motivation in the game was that he chose to participate to earn the world's respect, so that people would stop giving him funny looks. While Blanka performed well in the tournament, he ultimately lost in the final stages. The story of Street Fighter 4 wraps up at Sin's headquarters, where he runs into Dan as the place goes up in flames. Thankfully, the flames were extinguished by Sakura, who is now joined by Ryu, ensuring they all survived that day. It is soon revealed that during the Sin tournament, his mother went looking for him, and again the game ends with them reunited. Blanka resolves not to be concerned by staring faces, as all that matters is his relationship with his mother. Returning home with this new positive outlook, Blanka discovers that local visitors have arrived at his home to meet him, and as a result he makes many new friends in his hometown. As for the positioning of Blanka around this era, I found an old interview from 2008 where Street Fighter 4 producer Yoshinori Ono discussed this character. In this interview, he acknowledges the popularity of Street Fighter 2 and fighting games in Brazil over the years, but a strange twist occurs. Seemingly out of nowhere, he offers an apology to all Brazilians, stating, "I know that Blanka seems to be a strange character, and I don't want any Brazilian to feel uncomfortable with that. When Blanka was conceived, we knew there was a forest in Brazil, so we thought it might look like this. The journalist would quickly assure Ono that most Brazilian gamers love Blanka, but this interaction was enough to lead many gamers to speculate that we would never see him again, due to Ono and modern Capcom seeing Blanka as poor representation for the country. As time moved on, in the mid-2010s Street Fighter V was finally announced. During the early promotional stages, Yoshinori Ono showcased the Brazilian stage while wearing a Blanka costume. Naturally, this led many to believe Blanka was being revealed for the game, but surprisingly to some, Blanka was initially absent, replaced by a newcomer named Laura, a brand new Brazilian fighter created reportedly with input from actual Brazilians. This added further fuel to the idea that Capcom would drop in Blanka from future games. However, fortunately, this was clearly never the case. We would later learn that Blanka's story was far from over, and he was added to the game as a DLC fighter. In Street Fighter V, Blanka's redesign featured longer, wilder hair on his head, limbs and chest, with additional orange hair lining his limbs. For those who prefer Blanka's traditional look, his Street Fighter II appearance becomes his nostalgia costume in this modern game. The story in Street Fighter V, which occurs after the events of Street Fighter IV, finds Blanka back in Brazil, now selling dolls known as Blanka-chan. During this time, he meets Laura for the first time, leading to a fight after she accidentally steps on one of his dolls. After defeating her, Laura apologises and calls her brother Sean, who suggests Blanka sell the dolls in Japan, believing there will be a bigger market there. This leads Blanka to a Japanese arcade, where a comical scene occurs as he accidentally breaks an arcade machine, lamenting that it wouldn't last a day in the jungle. The tale ends with Sakura arriving and reuniting with Blanka, who decides to tell the arcade manager about the Blanka-chan dolls and suggests that they be put inside the machines. This leads to the dolls becoming hugely popular in Japan, although Blanka is unaware of this, bringing his strange tale to a close for now. Honestly, Capcom sure do love making this fighter look as goofy as possible. It reminds me of how Vince McMahon ruined Kane after his perfect debut. As for the inclusion of the dolls in Blanka's story, according to Yoshinori Ono, there is actually a reason for this. Ono makes it incredibly well known that Blanka is his favourite character, and those familiar with him will notice he carries around a small Blanka doll. Ono in the past has revealed that he obtained this toy along with a few extras from the hamburger restaurant Jollibee's in the Philippines, similar to a Happy Meal from McDonald's. The Blanka-chan dolls in the game directly reference Ono's own doll. Yes, that's right, you heard me right. Blanka became as comic relief as he is in Street Fighter V because the game's man-child of a producer literally eats the equivalent of Happy Meals. I have no words for this lack of sophistication other than gutter trash. Aside from showing up in Street Fighter V, Blanka has made many other appearances over the years, with notable ones including showing up in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, where he showed up as DLC. In the game, he teamed up with Sakurai to search for Pandora's box, eventually rescuing Dan from within it. Blanka also appeared as a stage boss in Street Fighter Cross Mega Man, and as an available fighter in Puzzle Fighter, as well as an armor in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, allowing players to make their character look like Blanka. His next huge appearance though would of course occur in Street Fighter 6. But before we get to that, let's talk about some more utterly bizarre trivia that exists around this enigmatic fighter. After thundering onto the scene 33 years ago, his legacy endures, regularly appearing in various games. From the Street Fighter series itself to SNK games, the Wreck-It Ralph movie, and even Fortnite, Blanka's impact is everywhere, which is why it's no surprise that there are many weird and wonderful facts about this amazing character. So let's further analyse some of the weirdest of all. Let's start with this one for you. There is surprisingly also a girl version of Blanka. Street Fighter V brought many new fighters into the mix, including Laura Matsuda, whom we mentioned earlier. Added to the franchise to increase Brazil's representation, Laura was proposed specifically by Capcom Brazil. The sister of Street Fighter III's Sean, Laura can use various grappling techniques and throws. More shockingly, to excuse the pun, like Blanka, she can manipulate electricity, performing moves such as the Thunderclap projectile, paying homage to Brazil's first Street Fighter character. So with that said, does this mean I am grasping at straws and claiming that Laura is the female version of Blanka? Well no, as there's a more amusing side of this story. Back in 2015, at the Brazil Game Show, at the PlayStation stand intended to reveal Laura to the public, it became a lot more trivial than it was initially intended to be. Unfortunately, images and even a trailer had already leaked online showing off Laura, making the official announcement less exciting. Street Fighter V producer Yoshinori Ono tried to change this by cracking jokes about the leaks, playfully teasing who Street Fighter V's first Brazilian fighter would be. This included Blanka himself, Shun Matsuda, and most hilariously, a green female fighter with wild red hair known as Blanka. She has since been added to the Shadaloo Combat Research Institute biographies found on the Capcom Fighters Network. While she hasn't been given a backstory, Street Fighter V director Takayuki Nakayama has joked that Blanka is Blanka's Midnight Bliss form, a comical reference to Darkstalkers. This was later capitalised on when Blanka appeared in Blanka's Midnight Bliss form on the cover of one of the Street Fighter vs Darkstalkers comics. For those desperately seeking to experience death by Snoo Snoo, men of culture have since modded this pungent female into Street Fighter V, meaning you can play as Blanka in all of her scare-rousing glory. Next, let's talk about the ridiculous reality that Blanka's real name is Jimmy, Mr. Beast. While most people played Street Fighter 2 back in the day, I doubt many gamers sat through the single-player arcade mode and beat the game with every character. Each fighter's ending reveals a unique sequence that fleshes out the game's loose lore. This will allow us to learn more about Blanka beyond his combat abilities. Defeating the Darsley Bison at the end of a playthrough sees an elderly woman running towards Blanka, adamant that he is her long-lost son Jimmy. She explains that her son was lost in an airplane crash over Brazil when he was a little boy, and identifies Blanka as her son by the anklet he wears, which she gave him for his birthday. Believing her story, Blanka hugs the woman, bringing a happy ending to the tale. Or is it? Conspiracy theorists point out that Blanka can't be the real Jimmy, since if he was lost as a child, his anklet wouldn't fit his adult size. I guess the moral of the story is that Blanka isn't Jimmy, the moon landing wasn't real, and they are turning the freaking frogs gay. Our next interesting nugget of information relates to Blanka's early conceptual stage, which we also mentioned earlier. An early Street Fighter 2 concept document reveals the character known as Anna Bebe, an 18-year-old, 230cm tall, 200kg beastman raised by the Lions. Managed and tamed by Rothenberger, Anna Bebe is proficient at biting and scratching, but is extremely weak to fire with a special move called Beastman Attack. What I didn't mention earlier though is that it's often noted that Anna Bebe's name had already been used in Japanese media, specifically in the manga Jungle no Oja Tar-chan. Given Anna Bebe's design, it's easy to see why many would view this character as inappropriate, so shifting to the racially ambiguous looking Blanka was less controversial. However, some speculate that the Beastman gimmick shared by Blanka and Anna Bebe is purely coincidental. Later design documents reveal Blanka's conceptualization in various ways, including a fighter resembling the famous Japanese wrestler Tiger Mask, named Tiger Blanka. Another illustration shows a ninja-like character called Ninja Blanka, and a beastly looking one most closely resembling his final design labelled Hammer Blanka. The Tiger Mask persona, also a character in a Japanese manga, featured a character named Gorilla Man, who like Blanka had a feral appearance, wild hair and sharp teeth. The connection between the two is hard to ignore. Moving along, one game implies that Blanka and the Incredible Hulk have similar powers. The late 90s were a crazy time for fighting game fans and comic book nerds, with annual Marvel and Capcom crossover games. After Akuma's appearance as a secret character in X-Men Children of the Atom and X-Men vs Street Fighter in 1997, we got Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter, the most ambitious crossover yet, introducing characters from the wider Marvel universe to compete against Chun-Li, Dhalsim, Ken, and others. While Blanka didn't appear as a playable fighter, he featured in the game's story, specifically in the Incredible Hulk's ending. Bruce Banner theorises that Blanka's mutation and green appearance might be due to the same reason as his own. A further Blanka Easter egg can be found in one of the stage backdrops, where he's seen sitting by a campfire, crouching and snarling opposite the X-Men character, Beast. The 90s were a wacky time for fighting games, that's for sure. Adding to the debate around this fighter, in most games Blanka's primary palette is bright green, though some insist he's yellow. Looking at the 1991 version of the game, he does appear somewhat yellowish green, but to me, he's always been green. This perception likely stems from the supplementary artwork, action figures, and even the Super Nintendo box art depicting him as a very vivid green. We have already covered some of the strange reasons given regarding his coloration, but let's be fair, the world and story of Street Fighter is never clear cut, and it's unlikely that the developers knew how influential their game would still be over 30 years after its release. Convoluted storytelling and localizations aside, Blanka's strange appearance exists for two reasons. Firstly, to provide a fighter who looks strikingly different from the more realistic characters, and secondly, to appeal to children. And my god was I suckered in by his awesome design when this game hit arcades, so a great decision was clearly made. As we continue on our journey discussing some of the more bizarre elements of this fighter, we have to talk about one of Blanka's iconic moves, the one where he bites opponents in a vampire-like fashion. The Art of Street Fighter book highlights this move's origins, with Street Fighter 2's co-lead designer Akira Yasuda stating he got the idea from the NES game Pro Wrestling of all places. The game features an annoying character known as the Amazon, a sort of merman beast. Yasuda recalls using the Amazon's biting move repeatedly and finding it frustrating to be on the receiving end. In Street Fighter 2, Blanka's bite pays homage to that frustration. Given both characters' green appearance, it's easy to see why Yasuda thought of the Amazon when working on Street Fighter 2. We've discussed plenty of strange facts today, but this one might be the most bizarre of all. Blanka was potentially named after a tourist attraction. Earlier we mentioned that Blanka appeared to carry the name Hammer Blanka at one point during its development. This name ties directly to a connection found on thrillingtalesofOldVideogames.com. The site discusses an old resort in Wakayama. Essentially back in 1971, the new Shirahama Tropical Botanical Garden was turned into a leisure facility, creating the tourist attraction Hammer Beach, a nod to the Moroccan city of Casablanca. The location was designed to give a sense of jungle paradise differing from the norm in Japan. Old flyers show women in carnival-style clothing and lush green areas. Despite its popularity, operations were scaled back in 1998, and the park was eventually closed completely by 2005. The location of Hammer Blanka is relatively close to Capcom's headquarters in Osaka, Japan, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Blanka was named after this location. After stumbling across this article, a Twitter user reached out to Akira Yasuda to ask if there was any truth to this, and if Blanka was named after this leisure facility. Yasuda replied, "It could have been. For some reason I remember Hammer Blanka, so while the link isn't conclusive, even one of the creators of Street Fighter 2 thinks it's a tough theory to dismiss." But enough about cool trivia, let's dig into talking about Blanka's modern day existence in Street Fighter 6. Remember some of my complaining from earlier about over the years Blanka increasingly lacking in aura? Well, in my opinion, in Street Fighter 6 he has less aura than in any of the previous games, and looks more goofy and less intimidating than before. Perhaps worst of all though, Capcom retconned the reason for him being green yet again, with it being less interesting than ever before. In a World Tour mode exchange, Blanka claims that he borrowed the power of the jungle, which might sound cool at first, until he reveals he borrowed that power to protect himself from bugs. In a moment destroying any aura whatsoever he might have left, he reveals that he isn't really green at all, and instead he is only that colour due to his skin becoming stained due to regularly coating himself in a plant-based paste so he doesn't get bitten by insects. That's right, the truth is now that according to Capcom, that Blanka is green and looks like a monster simply due to the fact that he is just a very ugly man who clearly doesn't have a bath very often.
Brother,
Arguably, this reveal makes Blanka more horrendous and unsettling than ever, but in my opinion, for all the wrong reasons. Rarely ever washing, he is essentially just Asmongold now. According to the official Street Fighter website, they describe this dungarees-wearing buffoon as a kind-hearted defender of nature, and add that Blanka has become an adventure tour guide, confident his intimate knowledge of the jungle will serve as a springboard to fame and a comfortable life for his beloved mother. Honestly, what has this character become? I prefer Corporate Kane.
here is my resume.
Oh.
Now existing as an activist in the series, which makes sense why he smells and never washes, to promote his adventure tour travel company's trip to the Amazon forest, Blanka launches a dull online ad campaign featuring Blanka-chan, a poorly conceived cryptid sprite mascot. The campaign somehow managed to be a success, most amusing those already familiar with Blanka. However, a gullible young girl named Lily, the least popular Street Fighter 6 character of all, inexplicably believed Blanka-chan was a real sprite, and decides to travel to Brazil to meet this fictional character in person. What an absolute smooth brain. In the Amazon, Blanka, awkwardly dressed in his uninspired Blanka-chan costume, is half-heartedly guiding tourists when out of nowhere, Lily stumbles out from behind a tree. In a painfully awkward attempt to maintain his flimsy persona, Blanka asks if she wants to shake hands. Lily, far too amused for what was happening, mentions that her imaginary spirit companion, Toinho Ikono, wanted to see more of Blanka's dull character, leading to an anticlimactic and utterly pointless fight. After this useless, unnecessary confrontation, Blanka, now out of his costume and visibly tired, alongside Lily found themselves on a slow boat along the Amazon River. Blanka awkwardly apologised for the ridiculous lie about being a jungle sprite, explaining he wanted to keep his real identity a secret to avoid crushing children's dreams, an explanation that felt both forced and unconvincing. How very Mr. Beast. Lily, for reasons unclear, shrugged off his apology, stating that it made no difference whether he wore a costume or not, since she believed he had the spirit of the jungle within him. Before leaving, she vaguely and unconvincingly explained that she felt the power of all the trees and animals inside him, which she claimed was the real sprite she had been seeking. As the scene concluded, Blanka was left alone on the boat, contemplating the hollow realization that if the power of the jungle was real, then Blanka-chan, and by extension himself, as the so-called king of the jungle, must be real too. So reflecting back on the embarrassing fall of this once great character, what can we learn from all of this? I guess the simple answer is that sometimes less can be more, and perhaps monsters should be left as monsters. Let's just say there are reasons why people were fascinated with this character in the early 90s, yet have zero interest in his existence in Street Fighter 6. What a dreadful way to write such a once so promising character. I am 100% serious when I say this. We were better off when he was Charlie Nash in the Street Fighter live action movie back in 1994. The character recently has been written that poorly. If you enjoyed this dissection of this classic video game character's storied career, you probably love fighting games. So don't forget you can get up to 90% off of thousands of awesome games, including all of the major fighting titles and collections using my affiliate link via the pinned comment. Happy shopping! Or if you want to support my videos in a more personal way, please consider backing the show over on Patreon. Cheerio!